You're here, but it doesn't feel like enough. Not today, not yet, maybe not for a while, and you can't quite name what's missing. You just know something is. And the longer that feeling stays, the more you convince yourself there's still something missing. Something you haven't fixed yet, something you haven't finished, something you haven't become. And so you keep moving, keep adjusting, keep trying to close the gap between where you are and where you think you should be. You already know this isn't working, but you can't stop doing it. And the whole time, there's a quiet voice asking whether any of this is actually working. You're not broken. You're not behind. But somewhere along the way, you absorbed a belief you never agreed to. The belief that where you are right now is just the waiting room, a placeholder, a rough draft of the life that actually counts. And here's the thing about that belief. It doesn't feel like a belief. It feels like the truth. And that's the problem. You're not alone in this. Buddhism has been looking at this exact pattern for a very long time. And what it found might change how you see where you actually are. That's what we're going to explore today. And you felt this, that low-grade constant hum of not quite enough. It follows you into the morning before you even check your phone. It sits beside you through meals. It rides with you in the car, down the same road you've driven 100 times. It doesn't scream, it just hums, and the humming keeps you planning, keeps you scanning the horizon, keeps you looking for the version of things that will finally make it stop. Buddhism calls this dukkha, not suffering in the catastrophic sense, not grief, not crisis, not loss. More like a persistent, low-level dissatisfaction that doesn't fully quiet, even when things are going well. Even when, by every external measure, life is fine. And the reason it persists isn't because something is wrong with you. It's because the mind has been deeply trained to look ahead, to treat the present moment as raw material for something better. To treat right now is just the prep work for later. The present has never been the destination. It's always just the runway. If this is landing for you, there's more of this on the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The Buddha said, if you are quiet enough, you will hear the flow of the universe. Not the flow of what's coming, the flow of what is. But here's what makes this so difficult, to actually live. Thinking about the future feels responsible. Planning feels productive. Waiting for things to be better feels like you're taking life seriously. Like you understand how things work. And you do. That's the part nobody names. The longing isn't a character flaw. It's not weakness. It's not ingratitude. It's just misdirected. Because somewhere along the way, you started using the future as proof that the present is real, as if your life only matters once it becomes something else. Once the career is more stable, once the relationship is more certain, once you're further along, less tired, more sure of where all of this is going. And so the present keeps getting skipped, not on purpose, but steadily, day after day. The present is always the preparation, never the arrival. And you've been here before. That moment when a thing you were working toward finally arrived. The job, the move, the relationship that finally felt solid. And for a second, there was stillness. Everything was quiet. You thought, this is it. And then, almost immediately, something new appeared on the horizon. Almost before you could even name what you were feeling. A new gap, a new condition, a new version of not quite there yet. That's the pattern. Not because you're ungrateful, not because you're incapable of satisfaction, but because the mind was never taught how to rest in arrival. It was only ever trained to move towards something. Seeing that clearly, actually seeing it, is where something begins to shift. In Buddhism, there's a teaching about citta, the mind that moves, the mind that reaches, grasps, and avoids. This isn't a moral failure. It's the nature of an untrained mind. By default, it moves toward what isn't here. and away from what is. That's what it does. But default is not destiny. The mind can be trained to rest, not to stop thinking, not to become numb, not to stop caring about the future or building towards something real, but to stop treating the present as insufficient, to stop loading the present moment with everything it isn't. And that distinction matters, because when most people hear "be present," they picture someone who has let go of everything. No goals, no ambition, no sense of direction, just drift. But that's not what this is. The present moment isn't passive. It isn't a retreat from your life. It's the only place where anything actually happens. Think about that for a moment. Every decision you've ever made, you made it here. Every connection that was real, every conversation that mattered, every time something inside you actually shifted, it all happened in a present moment. Not in the future, not when you were finally ready, right here, in a moment exactly like this one. The problem isn't that you think about the future. The problem is that you've made the future a prerequisite for living. You've turned what's coming into the condition for what's here. And here's what's true about prerequisites. They always have one more condition waiting behind them. You know this. You've lived this. The thing you were waiting for arrived, and the feeling lasted for a week, maybe two. And then the next condition appeared, and the one after that. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because the mind was never redirected. It was just handed a new horizon and sent moving again. And the thing about waiting is that it doesn't even feel like a choice. It feels like patience. It feels like wisdom. It feels like you're being reasonable about where you are in the process. But patience is waiting for something external to change. What Buddhism points to is something different. It's not about waiting at all. It's about looking more clearly at what's already here. Because most of the time, when you say, "I'll be okay when things are better," you're not describing a specific, definable threshold. You're describing a feeling, a sense of having finally landed, a relief that you can't quite name. And here's what matters about that. That feeling you're waiting for, it doesn't live in the future. It doesn't arrive with the accomplishment. It doesn't come packaged inside the resolution. It's available here, right now. But the mind has to stop moving long enough to feel it. Something is shifting in how you understand this. And here's where the practice gets more specific. Because it's one thing to understand this intellectually. It's another thing to actually do it. And most people who hear "be present" do understand it at some level. They've heard the ideas. They've read the books. They've nodded along at exactly this kind of content. But understanding doesn't change the habit. Only practice changes the habit. So what does the practice actually look like? On an ordinary Wednesday, it looks like noticing. That's the first move. Not fixed, not forcing your mind into stillness, not demanding that you feel peaceful, just noticing where the mind went. It wandered into tomorrow, into next month, into the version of your life that hasn't happened yet. And you notice. That noticing is the return. The moment you see the mind out there in the future, using it as a verdict on the present, that moment of seeing is the practice. You don't have to drag it back. The seeing is the return. And then, gently, you let the present come back into focus. Not because you solved anything. Not because the future concerns disappeared, but because you made the choice, consciously, to be here for this moment. Even if this moment is unremarkable. Even if this moment is hard. Even if this moment is nothing like what you imagined. It's yours. And the Buddha understood something about this, that most of us spend our whole lives working around. He said, "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment." Not because the past and future don't matter, but because the mind that's always elsewhere can't actually do anything. It can only think about doing things. The doing happens here. Think about the times in your life when you felt most alive, most connected, most like yourself. Were you thinking about the future? Were you managing the gap between where you were and where you wanted to be? Or were you just there, fully in it, not monitoring yourself from a distance, not narrating your own experience, just inside the thing? That's presence. And you've had more times than you realize. You just didn't know you could choose it. You thought it arrived on its own, in exceptional moments. The kind of moments that announce themselves. The vacation, the celebration, the crisis that made everything else seem small. But it's available in the ordinary ones too. It's available in this one. Not because this moment is special, but because presence isn't about the quality of the moment. It's about the quality of your attention to it. And attention, like every skill, is something you can practice. You can get better at it. Not perfect, not permanently, but gradually in the direction of being here. And that's where the Buddhist practice of compassion becomes part of this too. Because the mind that keeps running toward the future is not an enemy. It's not a flaw in your character. It's a part of you that's trying, in the only way it knows how, to keep you safe, to keep you prepared, to make sure you're not caught off guard by what's coming. And that part of you deserves some gentleness. Not indulgence, but gentleness. The practice isn't forcing the mind to stop. The practice is meeting the mind where it is, seeing what it's doing, and offering it something better. Not a better plan, not a better future, but the actual present, the actual texture of this. Here's what that looks like in practice. The mind starts its familiar move. It begins cataloging what still needs to happen, what isn't yet resolved, what hasn't yet arrived. And instead of following it out there, you pause. You feel your feet on the floor. You feel the weight of whatever you're sitting in or standing on. You take one breath that you actually feel, and for that moment, you're here. That's it. That's the whole practice. It's not impressive. It's not dramatic, but it's real. And each time you do it, something in you learns that staying here is safe. That here doesn't require escape. That you can be fully present in an ordinary moment and nothing terrible happens. In fact, something different happens. The moment becomes enough. Not because it changed, because you arrived for it. The Buddha also said, the root of suffering is attachment. And most people hear that and imagine someone living with nothing. No love, no ambition, no preferences. Just empty. That's not what it means. Attachment in this sense is the insistence that reality be different from what it is. It's the friction between what's actually here and what you've decided should be here instead. It's the gap you open up over and over between this moment and the version of this moment you would prefer. And that friction, when it becomes constant, becomes exhausting. Not because wanting things is wrong, but because refusing the present carries a real cost. It costs the actual texture of your actual life, the taste of the meal, the weight of the conversation, the ordinary, unremarkable quality of a moment that asks nothing of you except to be there. Think about it this way. Every time you say to yourself, I'll feel okay when, you're spending the present moment on a transaction that hasn't cleared yet. And it might not clear, or it clears. And by the time it does, you're already spending the next one. What would it feel like to stop transacting? Not to give up on everything you're working toward, but to stop withholding yourself from the life that's already happening. Because here's the truth that's easy to miss. The life that's already happening is the life, not the one you're building toward, not the one that starts when things finally settle. This one. And you've been spending it waiting. This is where the practice actually starts. Not in grand gestures, not in a retreat or a perfect morning. In the smallest, quietest refusal to wait. You eat the meal without thinking about the next thing on the list. You have the conversation without half your attention somewhere else. You sit with the ordinary moment and let it be ordinary. And you let ordinary be enough. That's the whole thing. But simple is not the same as easy. Because the mind will argue. It will tell you this is naive. That the world requires your constant alertness. That if you stop scanning the horizon, you'll miss something. Slip behind. Lose ground. And the mind isn't entirely wrong. The world does require attention. Life does ask you to plan, to prepare, to look ahead. None of that is in question here. The question is what you do with right now, while you're doing all of that. Whether you're here for it, whether you're actually inside your own life, or managing it from somewhere slightly ahead. But here's what nobody tells you about this. The things you've missed in your life. You didn't miss them because you weren't paying enough attention to the future. You missed them because you weren't here. The conversation that mattered. The moment someone needed you to really listen. The version of yourself that was fully available. The quiet joy of a Tuesday that had nothing remarkable about it, except that you were actually present for it. Those were all here, and the mind was somewhere else. This isn't about blame. It's just the honest accounting. The actual cost of the habit. And you can change. Not through one decision made right now and maintained forever. Not through willpower alone, but through 1,000 small returns. Each time the mind drifts into the future as a verdict, into the story that what's here isn't enough yet. You bring it back. Not harshly, not with frustration. The way you gently redirect someone you care about who started to drift. With patience, with care, with the understanding that the drift isn't the problem. The problem would be mistaking the drift for who you are. There's a Buddhist teaching on sati, often translated as mindfulness, but more accurately described as remembering. Remembering to return. Remembering that this is here. Remembering that you are here. The practice isn't the not drifting. The practice is the returning, because the mind will drift every day, dozens of times. And each time it does, and you notice and you come back, that's not failure. That's the practice. That's exactly what the practice looks like. You are not the restlessness. You are the one who notices it. And that noticing, quiet, unhurried, consistent, changes everything. Because over time, you'll find that the returning gets easier. Not automatic, but easier. Each time you bring yourself back, you're showing the mind something it didn't know before. You're showing it that here is not a threat. That here doesn't require escape. That here, strange as it sounds, is actually okay. More than okay. You spent years sharpening the part of yourself that moves forward. The part that evaluates and improves and plans. That part of you is real and useful and necessary. But there's another part, quieter, less urgent. The part that simply rests in what is. And that part needs practice too. It needs the same kind of attention you've given to everything else. You don't build it through effort. You build it through returning. Again and again. In small moments. In unremarkable moments, in the moments you've been passing through, on the way to somewhere else. This morning, for instance, before the day had decided what it was going to be, before the weight of the week had settled on you, there was a moment, quiet, ordinary, yours, and the mind moved through it on the way to everything that needed to be done. What would it have felt like to stay there for a second longer? Not to avoid the day, not to hide from what's required of you, but to let that moment be a moment. Real, complete, enough. That's the practice in the smallest possible scale. And it compounds, quietly, without fanfare. It accumulates in the background of a life. Right now, in this moment, something is here. Not perfect, not finished, not what you pictured when you imagine the life you'd be living by now, but here. Your life isn't in the future. It's not in the version of you that's still being assembled. It's right here, in this ordinary, unfinished, entirely real moment. And that might be the hardest thing to actually accept, because the future gives you somewhere to put everything. Your hope, your ambition, your sense of who you're in the process of becoming. When things are better, you'll feel better. When you're further along, you'll finally be you. But the Buddhist understanding of the self is that there's no fixed future version of you waiting at the end of something. There's only this, changing, impermanent, unrepeatable this. And this is where compassion enters. Not the soft, comfortable kind that looks away from difficulty. The real kind, the kind the Buddha pointed toward, which begins with seeing clearly. You've been hard on yourself for not arriving, for not yet feeling the way you thought you'd feel by now, for still carrying this quiet sense of not enough. And you were doing what made sense, given everything you'd been told about how life works, about what enough looks like, about what a good life is supposed to feel like. You were doing what made sense, and now you know something different. Not everything, but something. You know the waiting isn't neutral. You know every moment spent on hold is a moment that can't come back. You know the life that happens while you're waiting for your real life to begin. That is your real life. And something about knowing that changes how you move through things. Not all at once, but in small, accumulated ways. Each return becomes a little easier. Each moment of actual presence comes a little more easily. Right here, right now, exactly as things are. This isn't resignation. This isn't giving up on growth or giving up on wanting more. It's something more precise than that. It's the recognition that growth happens here, that change happens here, that the life you're building gets built, moment by moment, in the present. Not in the future, here. And that's the thing about all of this. The arrival you've been waiting for isn't at the end of something. It's not a destination you reach once enough things have been resolved. It's a way of moving through everything. You don't find enough. You stop insisting that what's here isn't enough. You don't become ready. You recognize that ready was never the right frame. Where you are right now contains more than you've been willing to see. Not because it's perfect, not because it's exactly what you would have chosen, but because it's yours, and it's now. And nothing that has ever truly mattered has happened anywhere else. This channel exists to help you see what's actually happening inside your mind. If that's what you're looking for, subscribe and take this with you today, not as a concept to hold on to, as a practice, as a return, right here, right where you are,